it, and I could drag it over. I could click this button or so on. I'm just going to drag and drop. So I'm going to drag it over and drop it. And now down here it's saying, okay, the connection's finished. Here it says the transfer was complete. And if I look down in my list here, you'll see there's the index 33 that I just brought over from the other site. Okay, so again, this is a pretty self-explanatory program. Once you understand how FTP works, you can use the text-based version or the graphical version. They both pretty much do the same thing. It's just a preference of which one you'd rather use. Now, your exposure to the internet up till now might not be through programs like Telnet and FTP and SSH, but I'll bet $5 that you've at least browsed the web and sent and received email with people. And Linux certainly provides all those capabilities. One of the more popular web browsers in Linux is Mozilla, and if I click on this little red horse head down here, you'll see a glimpse of the Mozilla browser. And if you've used any other browser, it should be pretty self-explanatory. Here we are in the CBT Nuggets homepage. I move my cursor around and moves over a link. It turns into a little hand. I click on that link and I get to some new web page. I can click on the back button to go back to a previous page. I could type in a web address up here and go to that website directly. If you want to configure this, you go under Edit Preferences, and that'll give you all the information here. You can use Mozilla to read mail and news groups. The Navigator portion of Mozilla is the web browser, and one of the things I just set up recently was so that my internet search engine defaulted to Google. Okay, so check out this and configure it the way that you want it. You might have noticed over here that some text I got cut off on the side here, and all of cbtnuggets.com did not appear up here. That's not Mozilla's fault. That's not the web designer's fault. That's just because I have my screen resolution set so low for recording these videos that some things got cut off and look a little ugly. And like I said, one of the other popular things to do on the internet is to read and write email. And under Programs, Internet, Balsa is the way that I like to do it. This is a little bit of an inside joke. There was an email utility in Unix called Elm and Pine, and Balsa is just another play on that theme, the wood theme, I guess. It's a lightweight version of those. Under this, you can compose messages. You click on compose. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You fill in the to field and the subject field and you write your message. One of the things you have to decide is how you're going to receive mail on your Linux system if you want to do it that way. And under setting preferences, mail servers is where you do that. Under the help screen, it'll give you some pointers on how to do this, and it just depends on what your information service provider provides you. Do they provide you with some kind of a POP account? Are you going to use a POP account on some other free web service like Hotmail or something? Are you going to run a mail server on your machine? And if your machine's up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that's an option as well. I would suggest using a POP server and setting that up if your information service provider provides that. And you should check with them, and like I said, go to the help screen over here in the Balsa main window and go to Getting Started, and they'll talk all about setting up your mail server. Now I want to talk a little bit about how to restrict access to your machine. One of the more popular ways these days is through what we call a firewall. A firewall is a barrier between you and the rest of the internet. And you configure the firewall so that you let through selected traffic. And by that, what I mean is you can let through accesses from certain accounts, or accesses from certain remote machines, or accesses for certain services, or any combination of those. Now, a great site that you should look at is called linuxsecurity.net, linux-sec.net. This has all sorts of information on this. It has information on how to harden your system to attacks. It has information on the top vulnerabilities of machines. It has little audits that you can do to make sure that your machine is not not being compromised or able to be compromised. It has tools so that you can configure SSH and firewalls, your mail server so it doesn't act as a spam mail server. Then it's got some tools, some hackers tools. A little while ago we were talking about packet sniffers, and their information on those is right here. And I think understanding the tools that hackers use is a good security measure, because then you'll understand what you're trying to guard against. Now, another great site out there is this site called linuxfirewalltools.com. This guy wrote a book on Linux firewalls, and I'm sure you can order it on the site here. You can also get information here, and there's a great tool way down here under Firewall Tools. This program called Mason is a really cool tool. It's an interactive configuration tool. So you run Mason on the machine that that's going to act as your firewall, and then you access through that machine certain things, and it's asking you questions about what kinds of accesses you want to allow, who can access it this way, who can't access it this way, and so on. And this is a really neat thing. Again, there's more information on these sites than it would take you hours and hours to read all this stuff. And I don't think you can spend too much time on security if you have sensitive information on your computer that you're trying to guard. We were just talking about firewalls, and the benefit of firewalls is that they can block access to any service on your machine at all. Now, there's other things that you can use to block access to services. One of them is called xinetd with TCP wrappers, and another one is called xinetd. This is just an extended version of this. Now, before I explain what these are, let me just say that they can block access to select services. And you might ask yourself, why would I want to use these if they can only block access to certain services when firewalls can block access to any service at all? Well, one of the first tenets of security is that you should duplicate security measures if you can. That way, if one mechanism fails, the other mechanism is there to back it up. So let's explain what xinetd and xinetd are. They're what we call super daemons. Now, a daemon is some service or some server or some process that's running on your system in the background. Well, what these things are is they're super daemons, meaning they control a bunch of other services like FTP, Telnet, IMAP, which is some mail protocol. And what they do is when traffic comes in over the internet and it says, okay, I want to connect to your FTP server, instead of us running all these servers and then that traffic going right to that server, what it does is it goes to one of these two things, and then they direct the traffic over to the actual server and start this server up so that you can establish that connection. Okay, so I don't want to run all these services at once if they're not being used, right? Because that would eat up resources on my system. It would eat up RAM, it would eat up CPU resources, and so on. So instead, I just run this one super daemon, and that super daemon then interacts and starts up the service as necessary. Okay. Now, when that person disengages their FTP connection, when they disconnect, then the super daemon stops the FTP server and puts it back in limbo, and then again, it's saving resources. Now, one of these two things is active in your system. xinetd is now the standard in newer Red Hat and Mandrake Linux systems. INETD still might be active in your Linux system, depending on what you have. But xinetd will be the standard soon enough. So the way INETD works is that it works in combination with this thing called TCP wrappers. TCP wrappers is basically two files, /etc/hosts allow, and then etc/hosts.deny. Now, these two files, pretty self-explanatory probably, they just contain a list of hosts that are allowed to access your system or hosts that are denied from accessing your system. Okay? Now, you can use these, you can set these up. If you have a system in both of these files, host.allow takes precedence. So make sure host.allow does not contain any systems that you don't want to have access your system. Now, xinetd is an extended version of this, and it doesn't use these files, but in spirit, it's the same thing. But xinetd can have much more fine-grained control. You can control who can access your systems. Maybe you can limit who can use FTP at certain times of the day, even. Okay, so let's look a little bit closer at xinetd. Before we go on and talk more about xinetd, let me just say a couple things. First, it's pronounced xinetd. So if you want to be hip, you say xinetd. Okay? And secondly, it's the epitome of why Linux is so great. The original version, xinetd, was discovered to be flawed. And it wasn't flawed like it had a bug in it. It was flawed in its design from the ground up. But you really can't fault the designers, right? Because there's no way they could have conceived of the explosion of the internet and the new methods that hackers would use to compromise systems. Okay, one of those new methods is what we call denial of service attack. A denial of service attack is when a hacker gains access to many, many computers around the world and uses all of those computers to simultaneously attack some website, for instance. And I don't want to mislead you when I say attack. What I mean is all they do is access the website, and it's the sheer volume of accesses that then brings the servers down to their knees. And you can't discount denial of service attacks at all, because they brought down systems like Yahoo, which is a gigantic organization with a large, large number of servers. So if you can bring down Yahoo that way, you could bring down anybody. So xinetd was written in response to the new internet, if you will. Okay? And the best place to learn about xinetd is at www.xinetd.org. And you can see it was written as a secure replacement for INETD, and it was written by this guy at Colorado. Okay, that's the beauty of Linux. Then the Linux community kicked in and said, oh, okay, how about if we did this, or here's a bug I found, and so on. And now it's mature enough that it's included in a commercial product like Red Hat Linux. Okay, let's look at some of the features of xinetd. Here's one of the big ones. TCP wrappers are good, but can only see one connection at a time. xinetd can limit the rate of incoming connections, the number of incoming connections from a host, or the total of number of connections for some server.